Hi everyone, my name is Anal Annandale and I'm an educational psychologist. This video forms part of a series on early learning, and throughout this series I'm wanting to focus with you on the foundational skills that children need in order to learn to read and to do maths. Now when I say foundational skills, I mean the pre-literacy skills and the pre-numeracy skills that we know help to build brains, because this is the stuff that lifelong learning and hopefully academic success along with it is built. When I put the series together, it was very important for me that it was accessible to all. So please feel free to share these videos, and you'll see that whenever I'm going to show you ideas for activities that you can do with your kids, I'm going to try and use items that are easily found in most households. Through the series, we are going to focus on 4 aspects. We are going to have a look at auditory perceptual skills, visual perceptual skills, concept development, and physical aspects as they relate to fine and gross motor skills. We would really like to hear from you, so please do leave us your comments and your questions below. We'll try and get back to them as soon as we can. And please also remember that we are on Facebook and on Instagram if these platforms are more accessible to you. Hi, so in the introduction you would have heard that we are going to be discussing 4 divisions of learning throughout the series, and that's the auditory perception, visual perception, concept development and motor development. Now the first of these aspects that I want to discuss with you is the auditory perception, because I feel that it's the most neglected of all 4. You can't see auditory perception, and so we tend to forget how important it is in development. But if you think about something like reading, for instance, reading is when we turn sounds and words into visual symbols for your child. So think about it and you'll realize that auditory perception is actually our starting block for learning to read. Now, in a minute, I'm going to discuss with you 3 aspects of auditory perception. But before we get into these, I just think it's important to mention that auditory perception is about so much more than just hearing. Your child's hearing might be 100% fine, but they could still struggle with auditory perception. Auditory perception is about what the brain does with the information that it gets from the ears. So the first aspect that we are going to look at today is auditory discrimination. And just from the word, you can deduce that that has to do with being able to hear the differences in words. And by default, if you can hear the differences in words, it also means that you can hear the similarities in words. Auditory discrimination is so important for 3 reasons. If your child struggles with auditory discrimination, they are always going to struggle to understand what somebody else is really trying to say. It's also going to have an impact on the clarity of their own speech production. And later, when they learn to read, it's going to make it difficult for them to identify phonemes. Now, phonemes are the smallest little parts of words. I'm going to get into some of the ways that you can practice this skill in a second. But first, there is just 2 things that I need to mention here. The first is that ear infections can absolutely wreak havoc on your child's auditory discrimination skills. And that's because if your child has a blockage or an infection in the ear, it means that the brain is not really getting the information that it needs from the ear. Little babies don't have well-developed auditory discrimination skills. It's something that they need to practice. And blocked ears means that the brain doesn't get to practice the way that it needs to. So be sure to check the ears often. The second thing is I will very often have a scenario where a parent will say to me, I know my little one pronounces this word incorrectly, but it's so absolutely adorable that I just can't get it over my heart to actually correct them. And I so hear what you were saying, but it's important to correct your child gently when he pronounces a word incorrectly. Because if your child always refers to a sandwich as a sandwich, he is also going to think that that is how you read and spell that word. And that's going to make it difficult for him to identify words correctly. Right, the fun stuff. Let's get on to the games. So some of the games you can play for auditory discrimination, especially if you're sitting in a queue somewhere, you're waiting in the car in traffic, is just to say 2 words and have your child listen to whether they can hear if those words are exactly the same or whether they differ. So, for instance, words that are the same, pillow, pillow. Words that differ, pillow, sillow. See if your child can pick that up. Another really good game is I Spy. So remember to use the sounds, not the letters. So you will say something like, I see something that is green and starts with a F, if you're thinking of a frog, for instance. Broken telephone, another really fun game where all the players stand in a row, one person whispers a word or a sentence to the second person, and so it carries on until we see whether that message came out clearly at the end. Simon Says, also a really fun game. Something you can do with your child at home is to make a sound jar. So I've made one for you here, really easy. All you do is you just need an old jar, glass works quite well, and you are going to fill it with all sorts of household items. Have your child close his eyes before you put them in, and then give it a little shake and see whether he can identify what you've put into the jar. With smaller children, we don't want to make it too difficult. So maybe show them all the options of the items that you've collected beforehand to make it easier for them to identify what's in the jar. And you can put all sorts of things in there: cutlery, beans, rice, toys, just about anything that you have in your house. Some other ideas maybe would be to play with tongue twisters, or to go for a sound walk where you walk in your neighborhood and have your child identify all the different sounds that he can hear. The second aspect of auditory perception that we're going to have a look at is rhyming. And to be honest, it's one of my favorites. I almost feel a little bit like a teacher who has a teacher's pet with this one, because rhyming is just so much fun out of itself. There's so much that you can do with rhyming. So be careful that when you teach your child about rhyming, we actually want to look at words that end the same and sound the same, instead of alliteration, which is words that start with the same letter. So I'll give you a quick example. Alliteration would be words like stone, sit, stove. Whereas rhyming is words like fat, cat, rat, mat. Because if your child is able to identify words that sound the same, that's going to help them later on to identify what we call word families. Now, word families are words that sound the same, like fat, cat, rat, mat. You will see that if your child can rhyme, all they have to do is change the first letter of those words, and they will be able to read 4 or 5 or 6 similar words. Now, with rhyming, you can go the classics way. You can read the storybooks and the nursery rhymes and sing all of the songs that we've all grown up with and that we know and that we love. Make up your own. Children love to play with rhyme and make up new rhymes. Lots of really fun ideas would be maybe to make your own rhyming book. So very easy, all you need is a notepad, and this can be an ongoing project. It doesn't have to finish within a week or 2. So what you would do is you would take a notepad and cut out pictures of things that your child likes or that he finds interesting, and all the ones that sound the same, you're going to stick together. So I've made one and I'll show you this quickly. I just got to get it. So for instance, on this page we have rat, cat, hat, and fat. Because of the phone camera, these words are actually reversed, so they're going the wrong way. And many of my clients will say to me, "You just said that we are not going to be teaching letters. Why did you write the words down there?" And that's for something we call incidental learning. We ain't going to focus much on the words, but we are going to write them down there. Because as your child pages through his book, something is going to click. So he's going to see, even if it's subconscious, that all of these words have the same ending. Now, most kids love this activity, but for some, it feels a little bit too much like worksheets. And we said that we were going to stay away from worksheets. So if your child finds the idea of a rhyming book a little bit boring, make it more fun and more interactive by maybe drawing the pictures and painting them with him and putting them in his room. Or by making puppets. So for instance, this took me about 2 seconds. I just used some old chopsticks, and I don't think you can see them, but on there I've got a picture of a duck and of a truck. You can also use ice cream sticks or craft sticks or anything that's available to you, and have them just play with these similar sounding words for a bit, because that's also going to help them to identify how they sound the same. A rhyming basket, also really easy. You give them a basket and tell them to fill it with all of the things that sound the same. A phone, a stone. They'll keep themselves busy for quite a while. Now, just one thing I also want to mention with rhyming. Your child is going to think that words like phone and foam sound the same. As adults, we know that you actually spell those words differently. But we are not going to get way too much into that when they are still young. So if the word sounds the same, even if the spelling is incorrect, don't point it out to them and just go with it, because it's more about the sound at this stage than the actual way the word looks. All right, and the third aspect that we are going to have a look at is syllabification. Now, that's a very big word for what is in fact a very easy concept. Syllabification is just about breaking words up into their different syllables. When I first started teaching, I was quite surprised at how easily children got this concept. I thought it was rather complex. But all my 3-year-olds snapped it straight away. And later on, I realized that it's probably because parents do syllabification or use syllabification often. Think, for instance, about all the times that you might have said things similar to close the refrigerator, right? So you weren't being miserable, you were teaching. Now, syllabification later on is going to teach your child when he learns to read and he comes across a difficult word, we're wanting him to break that word up into smaller parts. And that is syllabification. It's also a very natural process that even adults still use when they spell a difficult word. Think about it. I will literally say out loud, caterpillar, as I write the word. Really easy game to practice syllabification is what we call the clapping game. So you will just clap the different syllables in a word. Now the trick with this one is don't start off with words that are too big. You want to first just start off with words that have 2 syllables, right? So think about cheetah, for instance. And then you move on to 3 syllables, spy, de, man. 4 syllables. Rhinoceros. 5 syllables. Hippopotamus. Now, something I didn't realize until a couple of days ago is that your mouth opens each time you say a syllable. So if you had to give your child a mirror and tell them to look out for it, they will, for instance, see Spider-Man. Amazing, right? And if you want to add another sense, let's add a tactile sense, for instance. What you could also do is get your child to cup their jaw. So, for instance, with a similar example, your child will do this and then feel butterfly. All right. So, some of the things that, and I'm looking behind me to have a look at my notes. One of the things that I consider discussing with you is a game called Syllable Completion. But that's a little bit difficult. So if you are going to try this, I would mainly just leave it with your 4 to 5-year-olds. Syllable completion is where you tell your child to say a word but leave out a certain part. So for instance, you would say sunflower but don't say sun. So you want your child to say flower. Or butterfly but don't say fly. So you want your child to say butter. That takes quite a lot of concentration. So don't expect too much on that task from your little ones. All right, so those are lots of games and activities that you can try with your child throughout this week. And keep in mind that it's not just for this week. You are going to constantly use them and also build more skills and more games so that in the end you are going to have a whole repertoire of games that you can play with your young children. Now next week we are going to be having a look at the auditory skills of analysis, synthesis and sequencing. And I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks everybody and have a good week.